funny to think about Monday night reading because it's becoming a little bit of a rite of passage for authors who are part of my workshop, coming to one and then doing one. Just sort of this big turn. So if you are new to Monday night reading, let me just tell you a couple of things. I came up with this idea when I realized that nonfiction authors were not getting the same opportunities to read from their work that fiction authors do. And nonfiction authors write great stories. They have amazing things to say. So why not give them a chance to read? It's called Monday Night Reading because when I was a playwright, and Joey's here, so he would remember this. We used to have Monday night readings at the Playwright Center in Minneapolis. And so that is the namesake. That is the namesake. Anne Lester is joining us tonight. If you don't have her book yet, it's Your Best Financial Life, Save Smart Now for the Future You Want. Laura Stone, if you can give a wave, Laura. She's our Dean of Students at Top 3 Book Workshop. We'll be putting links in the chat throughout this evening so that you can pick up a copy of this book for yourself or for someone you love or both. I think based on the demographics I'm seeing here, it's going to be for someone you love, right, Anne? Maybe? Possibly?
I suspect so. I suspect so. Although, as one
Although,
of my jacket blurbers said, there was plenty for everybody to take from it as well. So
yes, yes. So Anne's book, you've already won a major award. Do you want to?
Yeah, I just was notified the Friday before it came out that I won the gold medal for best personal finance investing retirement planning book from Axiom Awards. So that was a phenomenal way to walk into the launch. Yeah,
Yeah, I would say so. Congratulations.
thank you.
So, just for those of you who are wondering about Monday night reading, maybe it's your first time. Anne and I are going to have a little chat. Anne's going to do 2 readings today. In between the 2 readings, we'll have a little more conversation. I have some questions planned for Anne. You'll also see in the chat that some of our regulars will comment. They'll share lines from what they hear that resonate with them. They'll share positive comments. We do not give constructive criticism at Monday night. We just celebrate. So when something resonates with you, please put it in the chat. We do save the chat for the author, so Anne will get this, and it's like a little present because she can't keep track of the chat while she's doing the reading, but she can look at it later and see what really resonates with you. And that's just a lovely thing to have, wouldn't you say, Anne?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're celebrating Anne Lester tonight. Again, Your Best Financial Life. Now, Anne, although you wrote this book while you were in workshop, it isn't the book you came to workshop to write,
No,
which is a memoir that's book 2, y'all. So once she gets a little break, she can pick that back up again. Hopefully you are. I hope you
I've
are.
actually just picked it up the other day, and
You
I was
did?
I was going to try to pull some of it out for a piece I have coming out in a newsletter for Michael Clinton's Roar group, and it didn't work. But I was like, oh right, I'm gonna get back to this like next month as
Yeah.
soon as my life gets a little less crazy because I'm
Oh,
ready to dig back in.
yay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good sign. But I would say you applied a lot of what you learned to this book. So in that respect, I'm going to ask you the 3 questions my T3 alums know so well, and they're probably grateful right now that they don't have to answer this question in front of everybody. But I'm going to ask you about your fundamentals. Who is your reader? What is your core message to that reader? And what is the promise of your book?
So I am writing for Gen Z and millennials who want to save. But maybe struggling with feelings of shame and fear and limited income and many things to spend their money on. And they may not realize that what they're really dealing with is their behavioral wiring and financial trauma that they may have experienced growing up, which has led to those feelings of shame and fear.
Wow. And what's the promise of your book?
Well, the core message is actually saving is for everyone, and
Oh,
you
core
can do it
message.
too. And so
Okay.
understanding your financial wiring, having financial jargon, sort of cheat codes, and using hacks to build habits are the key ingredients to financial happiness. And the promise is by the end of this book, you will understand why finances can feel difficult, and you will have key actionable steps to take that will put you on the road to financial security and happiness.
Nice. Love it. Laura, do you want to introduce Anne for us before we move forward in this Monday night reading journey?
I would love to. And just so you know, Anne, my kids and their cohort, there's 10 of them, have all gotten a copy of your
Ooh,
book
thank
because,
you.
well, you're doing me a favor, is what you're doing. So, so Anne Lester is on a mission to help rising leaders save smart and retire happy on time and target. And no one is more qualified. Anne spent 20 years as head of retirement solutions for JPMorgan. And with AARP, which I'm old enough to be a member of, she co-founded the Aspen Leadership Forum on Retirement Savings. In 2020, Anne was recognized for her extraordinary lifetime contributions to Americans' economic security with the prestigious Ray Lillywhite Award. A top-rated speaker and MC, Anne addresses the under 45 crowd as well as professional audiences and is a media commentator with coverage from the likes of Bloomberg TV, Barron's, CNBC, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. In fact, Barron's featured Anne on their cover for her outstanding career. Anne earned an MA in International Economics and Japan Studies from Johns Hopkins and a BA from Princeton. And she was awarded a Fulbright Graduate Research Fellowship. This is all to say we can trust Anne. Anne and her family live on the East Coast, where she is locally known for her exceptional holiday cookies. And I'll share how to connect in the chat. Anne?
Wow, thank you, Laura. That was phenomenal. Gosh,
Don't you love a Laura bio?
I do. Wow, I'm blushing.
I think she should have a side gig.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. It's nice to hear a different bio when you're constantly giving your bio all the time and it gives a little something different. All right, so Anne, set up our first excerpt for us, would you?
So I'd like to start by reading the introduction to the book, which is, as you tell us, right? The teaser, you want to start with an exciting story. You want to help people understand the scope of those three key points, right? Why, who is this book for? Are you one of them? The big picture about what I'm trying to tell you, and give you a flavor for what you'll be learning throughout the book. And I hope inspire people with the confidence to keep reading, not scare them away.
Wonderful, wonderful. Keep your eye on the chat, everybody, for links to purchase Anne's book. And here you go, Anne.
Here we go. When I was 26 years old, I crammed my life into 3 suitcases and lugged them to Narita Airport in Tokyo. I had just finished up an internship, and I was flying to Italy to move in with my boyfriend. We were starting to get serious, and even though I didn't have a job lined up, I was excited to start my new life. I walked up to the counter and confidently handed my one-way ticket to the agent. The man frowned at my comically large bags and heaved them onto the scale. "Sumimasen," he said in Japanese. "The allowance is one normal-sized bag. You need to pay a fee for oversized luggage." "How much?" I asked. The man glanced at the scale and punched a few numbers into his computer. "You owe 57,000 yen." "I'm sorry, that can't be right. Did you say 57,000? I was fairly fluent in Japanese, but I must have misheard him. There was no way I could afford the equivalent of $400 US dollars. Back in 1991, that was a lot of money and far more than I had. The agent spun the monitor around and pointed to the screen. It was indeed 57,000 yen. I stood in shock as the other passengers queued up behind me, waiting to check their luggage. Hands trembling, I handed him my Visa card. I knew what was going to happen, but maybe, just maybe. "I'm sorry, your card was declined." The passengers behind me muttered and glanced at their watches. Tears welled in my eyes. My credit card was maxed out, and it had been for years. I could barely afford to make the minimum payments. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I went to Princeton for undergrad, got my master's degree at Johns Hopkins, and won a Fulbright scholarship to study in Japan. I had worked on Capitol Hill. I just wrapped up an internship at Chase Bank. I had achieved so much, and yet here I was, a broke 26-year-old who couldn't afford to get her bags on an airplane. How could I expect to start a career managing other people's money if I couldn't even manage my own? As I broke down rethinking my life choices, the ticketing agent sighed as he eyed the long line of passengers behind me. He waved his hand. Just go. I can check my bags? I squeaked. Yes, please just go. I felt like the world's biggest failure as I boarded the 15-hour flight to Milan. The thing is, I'm a spender. I always have been. When I enter a store, it's like a tractor beam draws me to the most expensive items. I like nice clothing. I like to travel. As I was settling into a career in asset management at JPMorgan, I still had a ton of debt and bloated expenses. Rent, student loans, saving for a wedding, everything was a priority, except the most important thing of all, my future. I was barely contributing to my retirement savings, mainly because I was in my 20s and I simply could not fathom that one day I would be older and have to rely on that nest egg. It wasn't until my second son was born that I decided I needed to take this retirement thing seriously. I logged into my 401k plan's online planning tool one night and began answering some basic questions. When did I want to retire? How much did I need to live on after I retired? Then, the real kicker. What did I expect the inflation rate to be from now until I retired? The what now? At that point, I did what anyone else would do. I logged off the computer and started to do the dishes. Truth was, I had no idea when I wanted to retire. I had no idea what my retirement would look like, and I sure as hell didn't know what the inflation rate was going to be. And I worked in finance. In any event, there were so many more important things my husband and I could spend our money on, including our two kids. Throw in childcare, nursery school, and sky-high real estate taxes in New Jersey, and we were still living paycheck to paycheck well into our 40s. Ironically, despite my personal struggles with money, I was becoming an expert in retirement solutions. My job was to build and manage pension and retirement funds for large organizations, which involved making decisions about what kinds of stocks and bonds were most likely to generate the returns my clients needed. I crisscrossed the country, meeting with investment professionals, and even testified before the SEC and Department of Labor during the depths of the global financial crisis. I was very good at my job, and before long, I was skillfully managing billions of dollars of other people's money and generating great returns for them. But for some reason, I could not devote the same level of diligence to my own finances. Why? Because, well, saving for retirement sucks. It requires acting against every impulse hardwired into our DNA. Basically, my brain was wired to think 30 seconds ahead, not 30 years ahead. It took several wake-up calls and years of course corrections to get on track. Except, even though I made every mistake in the book, I had it relatively easy. Truth is, young people today don't have the same luxury for multiple do-overs like I did. Take John, for instance, a 29-year-old living in Brooklyn. He works at a startup and lives in a 3-bedroom apartment he shares with 2 roommates. He does his best to budget, but after factoring in student loan payments, rent, taxes, subway fare, and bills, at the end of the month, there's almost nothing left to stash in his savings. Over Thanksgiving, after a few glasses of Chardonnay, John's grandfather turned to him at the dinner table and said, "You know, by the time I was your age, I was married with 2 kids and I owned a house. When are you going to start getting serious about your life?" John wisely didn't take the bait, but the thought gnawed at him for weeks. Why wasn't he further along? Why didn't he own a house yet? And why did he have barely anything saved for retirement? The thought of buying a house, raising children, and retiring at 65 on his current trajectory seemed about as likely as winning the lottery. John is far from alone. According to surveys by the National Institute on Retirement Security, 72% of millennials are concerned they won't be able to live comfortably and achieve a financially secure retirement. Indeed, in 1989, when baby boomers were roughly the same age as millennials today, they owned over 21% of the national wealth. Millennials today own just under 5%. Talk to a typical boomer and they'll rehash all the tired old cliches. Young people these days fail at adulting. They study worthless subjects in college. They don't value hard work. They blow all their money on avocado toast and lattes. If you listen to enough Dave Ramsey, you'll probably come away thinking that millennials and Gen Z are too coddled, too addicted to card swiping, and simply lack the self-control to save for retirement. If only they could be like John's grandfather, you know, responsible and frugal, they'd be in much better shape. Except, here's the part Grandpa conveniently left out. When he went to college in the 1960s, his tuition was just $270 per year. He made less than $12,000 per year during his 20s and 30s, but that was easily enough to buy a home, raise a family, and send his children to college. John's grandfather never had to think about retirement because his job provided a pension that paid a guaranteed 85% of his salary at age 65. In fact, as late as 1990, nearly half of the private sector workforce had access to a pension. Here's something that may surprise you. Young people are actually much better about saving than previous generations. A recent survey by the Trans-America Center for Retirement Studies found that millennials began putting away money for retirement at the age of 25, whereas Gen X started at 30 and it took until 35 for boomers to get their act together. Meanwhile, data show that Gen Z are saving even earlier than millennials, setting themselves up to become the most accomplished retirement savers in history. But if you picked up this book, you might not feel like the most accomplished saver in history, no matter how hard you're trying, whether it's due to student loan debt, sky-high housing costs, inflation, or stagnant wages. There's no sugarcoating it. Most young people simply aren't saving enough. You don't get cheap college, cheap housing, cheap gas, and cheap healthcare like previous generations did. Instead of guaranteed pensions, you get a DIY 401k, and it's up to you to keep it funded and keep it growing. In a time when it costs so much money to simply exist, you don't have the luxury of making the same mistakes I did. As the Washington Post reckoned, you are the unluckiest generation in U.S. history. With all these headwinds, there's a good chance you don't trust the system. After all, the system brought you the Great Recession, which crippled career prospects for millions of college graduates. But the party was only getting started for Gen X and boomers who already had stocks, and for the next 10 years enjoyed one of the longest bull markets in history. Millennials who owned very few stocks largely missed out. And just as Gen Z were dipping their toes in the water, they were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic recession, record high inflation, and the crypto crash. In a time when the world careens from one catastrophe to the next, when you're struggling to put down roots while billionaires pay a lower tax rate than you do, you have every right to think the system is rigged. But in spite of these headwinds, you've got this. You can do it. Instead of avoiding the system, you need to hack the system. If you are in your early 20s and just starting out, you've already got enough time, your rocket fuel in the tank, to ensure a secure retirement. If you're a jaded elder millennial who has already lived through 2 crippling recessions and is only now able to start saving, you might need to get a little more creative. But you've got this too. Take it from David, who didn't open a retirement account until his 38th birthday. In just 2 years, he has made more progress towards his goals than in the previous 2 decades. By far, the biggest obstacle David had to overcome was pushing aside that little voice in his head saying, "You can't do this. It's too late. You have too much debt. You don't make enough money. You don't deserve to have a secure future." You do deserve a secure retirement and a secure future, even if it feels out of reach today. You deserve to have bigger goals than finally paying off that art history degree. We're going to explore a lot of hacks in this book to make saving relatively easy and painless. But I'm going to share the most important one right off the bat. Time. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you have an ace up your sleeve that no hedge fund manager can rival. You have the ability to put just a little bit of money away each year and watch it slowly grow into a nest egg that will allow you to have choices about where you live and what you do. And speaking of having choices, what do you want when you retire? If you're anything like me, the word retirement makes you think of my grandparents' retirement, which featured old people, golf courses, and early bird specials. It's hard to get excited about saving when you're picturing Great Aunt Muriel playing bingo in the villages. There certainly are people out there who worked at the same company for 40 years, clawed their way up to vice president, then retired at 65 with a gold watch and a Palm Beach condo. They spend their twilight years puttering around the house in slippers, playing golf, and traveling to see their grandkids. If this is your ideal retirement, then great, we'll get you there. Perhaps your version of retirement is quitting the grind at 50 and living your ultimate #van life fantasy surfing in Baja California. Or maybe you don't like the idea of stopping work. Study after study shows that seniors who keep working into their 70s and 80s maintain a higher sense of purpose and are less likely to experience cognitive decline. But no matter what you do, retirement means you have the freedom to change your mind at any time. As you read through this book, I want you to keep the following questions in mind. When you retire, where do you want to live? How will you spend your weekdays and weekends? Do you want to travel? Do you expect to be mentally and physically strong? How much money will you need? You don't need to answer these questions now, and you might not be able to answer them for many years. But this is the first of many hacks we'll learn to keep your brain thinking about the future. Your life will change dramatically in the next 3 to 4 decades. Your definition of retirement will change a few times. Perhaps it will change many times. That's perfectly okay. The only thing that shouldn't change is your financial security. You might be anxious about the future. You're not the only one. Surveys show that more than 40% of young people report being chronically stressed about money. And a recent Deloitte study ranked my long-term financial future as the #1 cause of stress among millennials and Gen Z. I know firsthand that these fears don't get any better the longer you put off saving. But what if you could eliminate the #1 cause of stress? Imagine entering your 40s and 50s knowing your future is fully funded and fully secure. Can you imagine how liberating that must feel? I want my 2 sons, one a millennial, one Gen Z, to have that freedom one day. And I want the same for you. No matter how far along you are on your saving journey, no matter how overwhelmed you might be feeling, you've got this.
And that is a good intro. That is
Thanks.
a good intro. And you do such a good job reading. And I love that you're taking out the old guard. Yeah, I love that. You're not afraid. I love that. That is, I'm just really impressed. That's really good. That hit
Thank you.
every note that an intro needs to hit. So I think I know the answer, and I'm guessing a lot of people here could take a stab at it as well. But why, with all your knowledge, why write for Gen Z and millennials? Is it because they have that time?
A bunch of reasons. And actually, before I found you, AJ, I had worked on a version of this book that I absolutely hated. I mean, hated. And I was dreading having to, I had a proposal, right? And I probably had 30,000 words written of it, which was my sample chapter, which went on for, it was like the first 4 chapters.
One chapter?
Well, yeah. So it was 4 chapters. I just hated it. And it was good enough to get a couple of agents interested in me. And agent number 1 said, wow, this is great. Let's go sell it. And my heart just sank. And agent number 2 said, I mean, it's okay, but I think it could be a lot better. And of course, that's the guy I hired. And then he was a former editor, and we workshopped and we ripped the whole thing up and started all over again. So he was the one, and again, this is before I met you, AJ, but he was the one who basically said reader first, right? He's like, you have got to be writing for someone specific. And I was trying to write to everybody. And it was too, I mean, there was no specific voice. It was terrible. And he also pointed out that there are a ton of retirement books out there for boomers, but there are very few books, if any, out there for Gen Z and millennials. And then I realized, as a financial planner person or financial person, that for Gen Z and millennials, it's a happy story, right? They have time. And if you're under 40, even if you haven't started saving, or even in your very early 40s, like, it's going to be a little crunchy, but you can do it. If you're 55 and haven't saved, I mean, it's a really different conversation that we're going to have. And there should be books for those people too, but it's a totally different conversation. It's a much less happy conversation. And so just saying, I'm not going to try to have both of those conversations at once was a really simplifying thing. And it honestly is the book I wished I'd had when I was that age, and it's the book that I wanted to write for my kids.
So you just you just singled out 55 and up. So what is in here for Gen X?
So any of the things that I talk about can be applied to anybody at any age. And I will say, for those of you who may be thinking, I haven't saved enough, it's not too late. You can always save more. It's just more painful, right? Because when you're young, you can count on your income going up. Almost everybody, if they're in reasonably skilled jobs, can assume that their salaries will go up at least until they're in their late 30s or 40s. And so when you're younger, it's kind of painless to save if you get into the habit, which is one of the things I talk about in the book, about not spending all your raises. So if you save half of every raise, right, it's painless to build your savings rate up to that 15 to 20% most people think is a good rate to save. If you're 55 and you're saving nothing, right, starting to save 20 or 30% of your income is really painful and requires some massive course corrections. That said, right, there are a ton of tips and hacks about how to automate things, how to stop some unconscious spending. One of the things that I talk about a lot these days is subscriptions and how easy it is to keep swiping on subscriptions. And I bet almost everybody on this call has got at least one thing they're paying for that they have no idea about. So it's and then all of the investment advice, I think, is relevant for anybody at any age. And there's a ton of really practical, this is how you invest money. The whole second half of the book is just very, this is a stock, this is a bond, this is how you build a portfolio, this is what you should look for if you're thinking about changing providers, hiring a financial advisor, right? Just very practical, down-to-earth advice.
Awesome. The book is Your Best Financial Life. Laura's got a link in the chat. If it fits your budget, we'd love for you to get a copy today during this hour. And one of the reasons, and this is something we learned from Mike Michalowicz, author of Profit First, one of the reasons is when a group of us goes ahead and buys on Amazon during this set period of time, it triggers this algorithm shift on Amazon, and it's a good thing for Anne. So if it's something that you have a budget to do today, that would be great. And we really need you to leave a review. Reviews are Amazon reviews are a currency for authors. They really, 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 really need it. I would add 15 more reallys if I didn't think you were going to think I was weird to do so, but it is that important. So if you could, it takes just a minute to leave a review. They don't have to be perfect. This is not a critical review that you would find in a trade journal or the New York Times. This is just what you liked about it. Honestly, can just be you can also edit reviews later. Just get it, just put it up. Just put it up. So, Anne, is there, beside from the fact that you're filling this big gap in finance books, personal finance, is there anything else readers would be surprised to find in this book? Any other perspectives or ideas?
I think, as I said at the beginning, the thing I'm most focused on is helping people understand why they feel the way they do about money. And most people have some emotional baggage in their relationship with money. And, we so often, and this was certainly true for me, frame things in this sort of moral, sort of, if I were a better person, I wouldn't keep swiping and buying whatever stupid thing you spend your money on that you think is stupid, right? And what that does is start shutting down our ability to, and we get in that sort of shamey, blamey, finger waggy, stressful place, it actually makes us much less capable of making good decisions. Like we get stupider when we're under that kind of self-imposed stress. And so just, I think what I really want to do is create a little bit of space so people can forgive themselves and give themselves a little grace, because we're the way the system is constructed, and I talk a little bit about this in some of the later chapters. We're kind of at the mercy of this DIY system that was created by accident. I mean, it literally was created by accident. There was nobody in Washington, D.C. saying, let's create this just confusing and weird random system that throws everything on individuals. It just kind of happened over, I don't want to say overnight, but there were a whole series of incremental shifts to the tax code that ended up in this sort of messy place that we're in. And I think it helps to understand that it's not obvious or intuitive to almost anybody. And then I'm getting on a rant that some of my colleagues here on this call who have heard me talk about this. I think the financial services industry unintentionally makes it worse because the industry tends to use language not from any sense of ill will, but just because most people in finance think this stuff is really cool and don't understand that the rest of the world thinks it's really boring and kind of scary. So there's a whole mismatch there of language and intention that makes the whole thing worse.
Yes. Very well said. Thank you, Anne. So you have a second excerpt, if you would set that up for us, please, and then let's get started.
So this is my favorite chapter of the book, and I've touched on some of it. And I actually wanted to call the book this, and I was shot down for perhaps good reasons. And it's chapter 2 of the book. So the first chapter goes into the life-changing magic of compound returns. And again, I think most people don't intuitively understand how powerful that can be. The second chapter is called You Suck at Saving, but It's Not Your Fault. And like I said, I kind of wanted to call the book that, but I was told that was a negative message and that, we wanted a more powerful, positive message. So, and it's all about why saving is hard. Chapter 2, You Suck at Saving, but It's Not Your Fault. Jody felt she was being responsible. She made all of her purchases with a debit card, so she'd never carry a balance. Her parents had struggled with credit card debt after the 2008 financial crisis, and she grew up believing it should be avoided at all costs. She wanted nothing to do with credit cards and their sky-high fees that they charged. But not having a credit card meant Jody couldn't buy the things she desired on her limited income as an editorial assistant at a book publisher. She couldn't do the things she saw her friends doing, like upgrade her wardrobe, fly across the country to her friend's wedding, or snag concert tickets. Then, one day, she saw a new payment option appear on Amazon. Buy now, pay later. There was no interest and no credit involved. You just had to make fixed payments from your checking account to spread a purchase over time. She could finally replace her 8-year-old laptop with Affirm, buy airplane tickets with Afterpay, and buy a new leather jacket with Klarna. It was easy and felt responsible, and all her friends were doing it. All that was required was a small deposit and a cursory credit check. Jody discovered that seemingly everyone offered a buy now, pay later, BNPL option. Even brick-and-mortar locations like Whole Foods offered BNPL at checkout. Then she discovered an app called Flex that allowed her to finance half her monthly rent payment and pay it back in installments, along with a $14.99 monthly membership and a processing fee. Everything she had been unable to afford suddenly seemed within reach. But a few months later, she was overwhelmed with installments. She was spending 2/3 of her income on purchases made months earlier. The 0% interest ballooned into 30% after she missed a payment. Finally, Jody had to ask her parents to help bail her out. The shame she felt was so intense that she could barely look at herself in the mirror. And yet, Jody is hardly alone. More than 60% of Gen Z has tried a BNPL service, and users under 25 have the highest rate of defaults. We live in a time when you can afterpay a luxury trip to Fiji, where Uber Eats lets you finance Shake Shack orders with 4 easy payments for $4.99. With apps that effectively gamify purchasing expensive things and experiences, it's never been this easy to spend beyond your means. Truth is, as dangerous as BNPL is, it's just pouring jet fuel on a fire that has been burning for a lot longer than online shopping has existed. We make impulsive purchases for the very same reason that we browse social media for hours instead of doing work, or order Chipotle instead of cooking a healthy dinner. In this chapter, I'm going to help you feel a lot better about some of those questionable financial decisions by shifting the blame onto your DNA. That's right, we're throwing mom, dad, and grandma fully under the bus. But more important, we're going to explore our icky relationship with money and learn to forgive ourselves for our worst impulses, which will set you up to succeed later in this book. This is Your Brain on Money. Every decision you make, whether it's choosing what to watch on Netflix or buying a new car, boils down to an epic battle being waged in your brain. It's a feud even older than Coke versus Pepsi, Nike versus Reebok, Alien versus Predator, or Yankees versus Red Sox. I'm talking about the emotional brain versus the logical brain. Your emotional brain responds to instant gratification. It avoids thinking about the future at all costs. It sees something shiny in front of you and wants it right now. Why have dinner when you can have dessert? Why do laundry when you can binge the latest Netflix sensation? Why save for retirement 40 years from now when you can finance a new Tesla right now? Sigmund Freud calls this subconscious area of the brain the id, which contains all of our urges and impulses and responds solely to pleasure. The id is not affected by logic, reality, or the future. In other words, if it feels good, do it. The emotional brain's mortal enemy, the logical brain, is constantly trying to reason with you. You can't just eat dessert because your teeth will rot. You have to load the washing machine or else you won't have underwear tomorrow. And besides, White Lotus just isn't that good anymore. You can't buy a Tesla because you need to prioritize your retirement. Your 10-year-old Subaru may not be the hottest wheels on the block, but it will still get you to work and back. When your emotional brain wants to max out your credit card, eat a tray of brownies, and drink 3 martinis, your logical brain is considering the health and financial consequences of your decisions. Sometimes your emotional brain wins the fight, and sometimes your rational brain wins the fight. Simply put, our brains did not evolve to shop on Amazon. Scientists generally agree that our ancestors' brains reached the shape and size of present-day humans about 100,000 years ago during the Paleolithic period, when we lived in caves, huts, and teepees and spent our days hunting and gathering. Instead of iPhones and AI software to make life easier, we relied on basic stone tools. Food was scarce, and to survive, we ate what was in front of us. Evolution favored now, not later. For most of human evolution, our brains resided in bodies that barely lived past age 30. And now we expect these same brains to dutifully put another critical resource, money, in a retirement account we can't access for 40 more years? Hardwired into us is a bias called future discounting. It means we instinctively add more value to something that's happening now, like, say, running away from a saber-toothed tiger, over something that will happen in the future. Future discounting is why we watch just one more episode instead of studying for an exam or getting enough sleep for a big day at work. Pleasure seeking and future discounting has served us well for millions of years. Unfortunately, they're just not as useful today, even though our brains are still stuck in the Stone Age. All this is to say, your poor brain is up against a lot. Can you find it in your heart to forgive it? It's not your fault. Blame mom and dad. One recent survey found that 70% of Americans don't think adults should share financial details with kids under 14, and another 14% think parents should never share this information. Over a third of parents believed the best time to discuss money is when their children grow up and are entering the workforce. After all, why bother giving kids information about money until they actually have to earn and spend their own? The problem with this theory is, according to the latest research, that children develop the foundation of the money skills that carry them through life by the time they are 7 years old. That's right. When you were playing with Lincoln Logs and learning addition and subtraction, you should have been making a budget with Excel. Behavior experts at Cambridge University found that by age 7, most children have grasped how to recognize the value of money and how it can be exchanged for something of value. By 2nd grade, you've already established the foundation of concepts like delayed gratification, budgeting, and saving for the future. In a famous study from the 1960s known as the marshmallow experiment, researchers at Stanford University gave very young children marshmallows and then left the room. The kids were told they could eat one now, but if they waited until the adult came back, they could have 2. The researchers recorded the results and then followed the children for many years, eventually discovering that those who patiently waited for 2 treats ended up being more financially successful as adults. After age 7, the adults around us continue to imprint either good or bad money habits. While conducting research for this book, I organized focus groups and interviewed countless 20 and 30-somethings about their spending and saving habits. Some were disciples of the FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early movement, and were aiming to retire before age 30. Others were nearing 40 and hadn't even thought about saving for retirement yet. Some grew up in wealthy households and some grew up in low-income households. There were a few unifying traits between the very best savers, but one stood out head and shoulders above the rest. They were taught good money habits from a family member. Take Kelsey from New Jersey, for example. She wants to retire before she turns 50 and maxes out her 401k and IRA contributions each year. She has more than $1 million saved in her retirement accounts and owns several rental properties. As it turns out, she also had a grandfather who taught her when she was a teenager how the stock market works and how to invest in real estate. Here's another reason to blame mom and dad. Research published in the Journal of Finance suggests that adults with a specific gene variant tend to make better financial decisions than adults without the variant. Intrepid researchers took these findings a step further when they managed to find 15,000 sets of Swedish twins and compared their tax returns. It turns out that even the twins who had lost track of each other had similar spending and saving habits, reinforcing the theory that many of our financial impulses are hardwired into our brains. If you didn't win the genetic lottery, or you didn't have incredibly forward-looking parents who taught you how to save when you were in kindergarten, are you doomed to a paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle? Fortunately, research suggests that only about 1/3 to 1/2 of our spending and saving instincts are based on genetics, and our parents' effects on our money habits seem to wane after around age 30. So the upshot is, even if you were keeping up with the Kardashians in your teens and 20s, you can retrain your brain to save smarter. This is not an overnight process. You can't jack into the matrix and instantly upload a retirement saving program into your brain. But wouldn't that be so much more useful than Kung Fu? You have to keep working at it. But I promise you can do it. We're going to learn new hacks and saving habits later in this book. But there's one thing you need to do first to set yourself up for success. Stop feeling ashamed of yourself. Don't get sucked into a shame spiral. There are few more stressful things in life than the aftermath of a poor financial decision. If you mess up at work, you may have to deal with some grief from your boss, but the pain is temporary. On the other hand, financial mistakes can take years to recover from, and the emotional effects persist long after the debt is repaid. Psychologists have long understood that shame leads to avoidant behavior, especially when it comes to money. A recent study by researchers at the University of Boulder, Harvard Business School, and Columbia Business School found that people with even minor financial difficulties overwhelmingly blame themselves and, attempting to hide their mistakes, don't seek help from others or take necessary actions that are painful in the short term. This financial withdrawal perpetuates a vicious shame spiral that leads to even worse decisions. Sometimes the shame spiral is dramatic, such as preventing someone deeply in debt from seeking bankruptcy protection. Most cases are milder, but they still can be very pernicious, like not transferring money to an IRA because it can literally cause pain for some people to watch their checking account balance drop as they transfer the money. Anyone can fall victim to the shame spiral, even those who are fully on track to meet their retirement goals. Here's the first and most important step to overcoming it. Let yourself off the hook. Forgive yourself for that $6 Frappuccino you had this morning, and forgive yourself for not negotiating a pay raise with your boss. Forgive yourself for buying too much house, too much car, or too much school. Forgive yourself for not being further along on your retirement goals. Whatever financial choices you've made that make you cringe, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself even if you don't think you deserve it. If you've been struggling to save, you're far from alone. In a survey I conducted in the summer of 2021, over 80% of adults between the ages of 21 and 45 said they were anxious or very anxious about their financial situation. Over 70% said their retirement savings were somewhat behind or far behind where they needed to be. So yeah, it's not your fault. Remember that the universe is indifferent to your mistakes. Accept that what is done, and that now it's time to move forward. Self-worth does not equal net worth. Helen distinctly remembers when she learned that you're not supposed to talk about money. She was 10 years old and living in a suburb about a half hour north of Boston. It was a blisteringly hot July day, and Helen and her friends decided on a whim to set up a lemonade stand in their neighborhood, one on each block. That evening, they had pizza at Helen's house and compared who made the most money and what they wanted to spend it on. Then Helen felt a tap on her shoulder. Towering over her was her father, who said solemnly, "Talking about money is impolite, honey." For years, those words stuck with her. In high school and college, she had no problem discussing politics, religion, sex, mental health challenges, and relationship struggles with her friends. But money was verboten. When she graduated and got her first job, Helen was emotionally grounded and ready for adult life, except for the money part. Every time she had to think about her salary, rent, making a budget, or retirement, she heard her father's words echo in her mind like the voice of God. Talking about money is impolite. Instead of asking for help with basic things like taxes or setting up a 401k, she avoided these conversations entirely until she finally hired a financial planner in her late 20s. Helen isn't alone. Surveys from market research firms show that over a third of couples don't know how much money the other makes. A Wells Fargo survey found that 44% of Americans see personal finance as the most challenging topic to discuss, more so than death, politics, and religion. Even in Sweden, where people talk about sex like they talk about the weather, discussing money is taboo because of the deep-rooted Nordic tradition of jantelagen, the idea that you should never act better or as if you have a higher status than someone else. Our insecurities with discussing money often boil down to a toxic relationship with our own identity. As Caitlin Zaloom, an anthropologist at New York University, theorizes, there is an unfortunate tendency to believe that your value as a human being is somehow made material in your pay and in your accounts. By discussing how much money they have in the bank, people are exposing how they're valued by their employer and how their contribution is valued even more broadly by the community. This dynamic has long benefited corporations who for years forbade their employees from discussing salaries. After all, if you knew the guy across the hall doing the same job that you do made twice as much as you, you'd be more likely to ask for a raise. In 2022, Hannah Williams quit her full-time job as a data analyst to grow her TikTok channel, Salary Transparent Street. The premise is simple. She roams the streets of major cities asking random people the impolite question, "How much money do you make?" The channel swiftly went viral, racking up millions of views and subscribers over the next year. The videos, which show nurses and engineers and teachers and scientists and architects and government workers telling the world how much they earn, have struck a nerve and empowered young people with the information and resources they need to ask for a fair salary. But on a deeper level, her work is forcing them to overcome their queasiness with money. So many of us equate our salaries and pay with our worth. We need to disconnect from that notion. It's literally just a number, Hannah explained. You should take the exact same approach to your savings. The amount of money you have saved is just a number. An important number, certainly, but it does not define you as a person. Your financial net worth is calculated by subtracting your liabilities from your assets. Notice how there is no consideration for how kind you are, how generous you are, or how loyal you are. There's no multiplier for being a brilliant cook or a loving partner. Don't ever let a number in a spreadsheet add to or subtract from your self-worth. You've got plenty of time to get on track, except that it will take time to get comfortable around your finances and that you'll never be perfect. I worked in asset management for nearly 30 years, and I still avoid opening my bank account out of habit. In my conversations with countless young people, those most on track for retirement are consistently the ones who are most comfortable talking about their finances. Some of them were taught to have a healthy relationship with money, but most were not. As we'll see in the next chapter, you can teach yourself to become a financial whiz by understanding your triggers and developing strategies to counteract them. The key is not to see certain tendencies as good or bad. They are simply brushstrokes of your personality. But first, let's all take one more deep breath and say out loud, I forgive myself.
And I wish that you on the replay could see the faces of everybody listening to your content. This is it's always fun to see, but everyone was really into your book, especially Joey, who just seemed to be completely astonished by so many revelations, and also being a Gen Xer, good-natured in realizing probably some things. This is a I'm sad you aren't getting to see this. People were into it, Anne. People were really into it.
Excellent. Thank you.
So in the time, that was a great chapter. Fantastic chapter. In the time we have left, I do want to ask you the two questions I usually ask all authors. But before I do that, what are maybe one or two strategies you want everyone here to do? Everyone here to do. You can pick
Everyone
just
here.
one.
The most powerful thing you can do, well, I'll say two things, right? The single most powerful thing you can do is automate. Automate your savings, automate your investing, and don't make yourself decide if you're going to want to save, because there's always something better to spend your money on. And if anybody here has got a 401k plan at work, that's the beauty of that whole thing. If it gets sucked out of your paycheck before you see it, it's magic. But the higher level thing that I wish I had been able to articulate in the book, because it's only been in doing all the podcasting and interviewing that I was able to say it this way, and I'll get it in the revision, is that think about friction, right? There's no friction anymore to spend our money. Like I'm old enough to remember writing a check at the grocery store. I remember having to physically go to a store to make a purchase. Okay, there's friction in that, right? It's raining. I don't want to go. I'm busy. The store just closed. If I wanted to buy something, without going to a store, I had to get a paper catalog and look at stuff and then find the little number and either call a 1-800 number or fill in a piece of paper. I mean, it was painful, right? There was a lot of friction and stuff would slow you down. Now you go tap, swipe, right? And poof. But there's a lot of friction to saving your money, right? You want to think about ways to reverse that dynamic and create friction for your spending and take out the friction for saving and investing, right? So that's kind of the meta thing. Like if you can put friction in, however you do it, and I have lots of hacks and tips for creating friction for yourself, but that's the overwhelming thing to think about. How can I slow myself down? How can I create friction?
That is one of the best tips I've heard in a really long time. How can I create? I mean, I'm the same. I of course remember all the things that you are remembering. I also don't know where my checkbook is right now.
That's good. That's friction.
Yeah, but I mean, if I had to go back to checks,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I don't know.
The bank will send you more if you ask them to.
I know. Does anybody actually accept them anymore? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do. I accept them.
Yeah.
Okay. So before I close on the last two questions, I do want to remind everybody, this is Anne's book, Your Best Financial Life. I want to also say thank you to everybody who's been buying copies. There's chat's been so many messages of people who bought copies during this hour. If I can ask you to please, if you bought a copy, commit to going to put up a review. You know, here's a couple little quick tips. You could find one line from tonight, one message that you took away from tonight, like the friction comment. That, to me, if I hadn't heard it tonight and I read it in this book, that would be worth the price of the book. So if there's one concept, Joey was really into, what was it? Future discounting, and other things. So the concepts that you took the time to note in the chat are concepts you could simply just put into Amazon review and say, this blew my mind. This alone was worth the price of the book, right? Done. Your review's done. Done. It's over. It's happened. Also, 5 stars, please. I mean, do an honest review, but
Please, an honest review, but yes,
Anne
thank
can
you.
Anne can say honest review. I can say 5 stars, please. All right. Anne, tell me one surprising thing about your author journey.
I'm really surprised that it took as long as it did. Like, I had no idea. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I thought I was reasonably well informed about the publishing business because I'd done a lot of research and talked to a ton of people before I left my job in 2020 and really threw myself into writing. But it was, I don't want to say it was, yeah, I was surprised by how hard it was. And especially after taking your class, I am surprised at how much I enjoy writing now. And I always have liked to write, but I actually am so much better about just sitting down and doing it for an hour than I used to be. And that's just muscle building. And I'm really excited now when I wake up and go, oh goody, I get to write now. And it's actually something I look forward to instead of going, oh, I can't believe I said I'd do this, So that's good.
That's good. And my favorite question of all, what is the change you want to see in the world because your book now exists in it?
I want more people to give up their shame about money and save. That's the change I want to see. I want to see people thinking, yeah, I can do this, and then doing it.
It's amazing to think about, what if that happened? What if that happened to 100 people, 500 people, 5,000 people, and how different their worlds would be and their families' worlds would be?
Yeah, it's literally transformational, and it just gives me the shivers to think about. And I've actually, now that the book is out, and even a little bit before, as I was doing some of the publicity leading up to it, I've had, I don't know, 3 or 4 encounters with people that have moved me to tears, telling me that they listened to something I said and they made a change. And I was just like, oh my God, that's so powerful.
That's why we do what we do. That's why those 3 years, 4 years, whatever, don't matter in the end. It's for those encounters and those transformations. Everybody, please know that we have another Monday night reading on April 1st with Casey Compton, In Search of You. And thank you so much for being here. I know you're tired from a big old launch week, and we're so happy you came.
I'm just so thrilled to be able to do this. It makes it feel more real, whatever. I can't talk anymore, but yeah, it makes it feel tangible, more tangible. So thank you.
That Monday night reading, Chuck, you got that done.
Yep.
Everybody,
super exciting.
Thank you for supporting Anne, Your Best
Yes.
Financial Life. Thank you for showing up and giving her support, putting things in the chat. Review. Congratulations, Anne.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody who came.